from the heart of Dubai, where tomorrow is being built today, to the world. Welcome to the CTO Show with Mehmet. Here, we redefine technology and reimagine possibilities. With Mehmet, delve into the riveting realms of AI, cybersecurity, and digital technology. Experience the thrilling highs and lows of startups. Immerse yourself in the spirit of entrepreneurship and witness the future of business innovation being written in real time. Now, without further ado, let's tune in and explore the future.
Hello and welcome back to a new episode of the CTO Show with Mehmet. Today I'm very pleased. Joining me, Michael Ferranti from Unleash. Michael, the way I love to do it is I keep it to my guests to introduce themselves. So a little bit more about you, your journey, what you're currently up to. Just I like to give teaser to the audience. We're going to talk a lot about DevOps and FeatureOps, AI, and a lot of topics, and about also Michael's. Maybe you can give us some of your experience working on new technologies and scale it. So I don't want to steal much from your time. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Really excited to be here. I'm eager for a conversation. This is, everybody's busy these days, and I look at this as like a little bit of a holiday from my calendar, just to talk about tech and to talk about big ideas. And so eager to dive into all of those topics. I guess by way of background, I am kind of I would say a tech executive that really specializes in kind of the product and marketing side of infrastructure software, DevOps tooling, and related technologies. I've been doing that for well over a decade now. In fact, in my LinkedIn thread or my LinkedIn feed recently, I saw it from a friend of mine, over a decade ago. We did a lot of work together in evangelizing the cloud back when the cloud needed evangelizing. Maybe it does again as well, because there's kind of some challenges with the cloud as well. But that goes all the way back to my days at Rackspace, when, believe it or not, Rackspace was the number 2 public cloud provider after Amazon. It seems like, wait, like that can't possibly be true. Like that actually was true. This was before Azure. This was before GCP. Amazon only, I think, launched S3, if I'm not mistaken, in 2013. So it seems like Amazon's always been there, but it hasn't always been there. And I was part of the cloud team at Rackspace in those early days. And so kind of, fast forward, I've worked in dev tools companies, I've done open source, I've done enterprise software. And so really eager to kind of bring that perspective to the CTOs and other technical people that are listening to the show.
Great. And thank you again, Michael, for being here with me today. Something regarding a little bit your journey, if you want. So you helped scale Portworx, from 500K to 370 million acquisition. Now, when you look back, right, and because we're talking about evangelizing the technology, right, and then talking to adopters, I would say, what do you think mattered more, the technology itself or how developers were enabled to trust and adopt the technology?
That is a really, really good question. And I feel lucky to give my perspective on it, because this is a conversation that I actually had multiple times with the Portworx founders. It's definitely both. Like, I would be lying if I said that one was more important than the other. However, the beaches up and down Northern California are lined with very expensive homes from technology companies that were not the best in the market. Like you can be very, very successful with the number 2 or number 3 or number 4 product in any market. That is categorically true. And in some ways, when a product is too good, I would say that founders can mistakenly believe that if you build it, people will come, or that people will automatically understand how why this technology is superior to another technology, when in reality, buying decisions are much more complex than that. There's relationships are certainly part of it. Kind of perceived risk is part of it. Fashion is part of it. Fashion is very, very important in the DevOps community. That's not a criticism. That's simply a statement of what I believe to be reality, that a lot of times technologies that seem to be the right fit and become very popular, that's what I'm describing as fashion, may not in fact be the most practical, right? Great looking pair of shoes might look great, and yet like your feet hurt at the end of the day. That's Kubernetes, which Kubernetes is actually fantastic for many use cases, but it's not perfect for every use case. So that's where faction comes in. And when I was at Portworx, I joined after an unsuccessful run at another startup, that for everything that we lacked in product, we made up for in visibility. We were perceived as the number one storage solution on the market for first Docker containers and then Kubernetes. Like there was kind of nothing underneath from a product perspective, but we excelled at kind of the PR, public relations, analyst relations game, community. We had an open source solution. We brought in partners that were like orders of magnitude bigger than us in terms of Dell EMC, in terms of VMware, in terms of Huawei and Pure Storage and others, in order to build on this open source base that we had. And meanwhile, this company, Portworx, who unbeknownst to me at the time had a fantastic product that actually solved real enterprise pain points, that was extremely well engineered, that had depth of defensible value from an IP perspective, were perceived as number two. And it's like, well, how can these things be? Well, the reason is because all of these things that are not technology also really matter. And I think that's something that's super important for founders to understand, which is just like you want to invest in having the best technologies. I would always recommend that if you can do it, hire the best engineers, right? Like these are all trade-offs, and I'm speaking in
Right.
generalities. But yeah, you want to hire the best engineers, but you also want to hire, the best product people and the best marketing people and the best, communicators, because it all is part of it. And when I joined Portworx, as part of that team, we were able to build on this solid foundation of technology, become the market leader, and then have a very successful exit as a result of that body of work. It wasn't just one thing.
Great. Now you mentioned about like it's fashion and the adoption. In general, do you see, Michael, like some founders, they do the mistake of thinking that open source is kind of a go-to market shortcut? Like we just like put it open source, especially in the DevOps space, right? We see that a lot. So from your experience, like is it like building the open core communities that you know do most teams get wrong about open source as a go-to market strategy, or is it something else? Because sometimes we've seen like companies who did fantastically well, but they weren't able to materialize it in other sense. And because at the end of the day, and people sometimes, they, I think they forget, I don't know, like you need to, and this is what you exactly mentioned about having the best product team. You have the best marketing team, the best engineers, of course. So this is money. Like you need to get some revenue over there. And I've seen like sometimes people where they say, okay, like let's make it free, let's make it open source, and they think like that will solve all their problems. What's your take on that?
It's not a silver bullet for sure. I think I would say I've worked for more open source companies than closed source companies. But I've also worked for closed source companies, and I've seen both work well and I've seen both not work well. So I think it takes there's some strategic thinking that should go into whether or not you open source or not. And one kind of law of open source is that it's much easier to open source something than it is to then close source it. And so it's not like any of these decisions are permanent. However, the pain that you need to go through to undo certain decisions is greater than others. And so the way I like to encourage founders to think about it when you're first making that decision, is what is the goal of open source? Which it sounds like, well, duh. Well, not really. It's not a duh. There are some companies for which open source actually is a key part of the development project. This is how we're actually going to build IP. Open source is still IP. It's just licensed differently. I would say Linux is the biggest example of this as a pure open source project. And then had commercial backers like Red Hat being first among many. Software development happens through the open source, often unpaid volunteerism. Docker is another great example of a organization that really built the core engine through an open source means. And if you're going to do that, you should have people in your organization that enjoy that type of work, and you should want to get feedback and contributions and hear no from your community. Otherwise, it's going to be very, very painful. If you, for instance, have a very strong CTO that's very strong working with customers, and you have a very commercial driven model, even for open source, sometimes it can be quite painful to hear from your community, hey, we want to prioritize XYZ, when you're hearing from your biggest customers, we want to prioritize ABC. Like if you are open source, that can be hard to manage if you're expecting kind of contributions to your core from open source. On the other hand, if open source is really about how do we make it possible for people to try this software in ways that would be challenging otherwise, then my first question will be, okay, if it's about trying the software, what other ways besides open source are there also? Free trial, for instance,
Right.
a freemium model, a free forever version. And if you have a solution that lends itself to a SaaS model, meaning it's kind of obvious that people would want you to run this for them, and that long term is your big business model, then I would encourage you to think really twice about whether or not open source is the best model for you. Because again, there are many ways to make it easier for people to try software. Open source doesn't have to be one of them. My current company, Unleash, the reason we open source is because we're actually quite unique in the feature flag market in that you can run us on premises. And there are certain barriers to running software on premise that's not open source that don't exist in a SaaS model. Our biggest competitor, LaunchDarkly, is SaaS only. And there are many large organizations. We kind of our ICP, or where we specialize, is very large organizations, financial services, as an example, that love the idea of using LaunchDarkly. And I work at Unleash. I'll just say that it's a good product. However,
Mhm.
it's a non-starter for them to use that SaaS. They want to be able to run it themselves, and open source makes that very, very easy. But it also creates challenges, which is how do you make sure that you're slicing up your open source in a way that when a customer gets value, if they want to continue to get incremental value, then they need to help fund the company so that you can continue to exist in the first place. And so it's really a conversation. There's no perfect answer on any of these things. And in fact, licensing models evolve over time. Sometimes I would say for the better, sometimes for the worse potentially, but it depends again what your perspective is. HashiCorp as a post IBM acquisition has
Mhm.
experimented, let's say, with a lot of their licensing model, and that's created friction within the community. Like that's normal. That's a part of growth. I think we're certainly experimenting with our own licensing model. I think that's just part of it. But it's good to know why you're doing it first.
This is, probably the best explanation I've heard since long time about the best approach to do it, which is like you do your I would say strategy, and you choose what works for you, and there's no one size fits all,
Yeah, exactly.
and depends on exactly your goals and your capacity also, as well, as you mentioned, Michael. So that makes a lot of sense. Now let's do some reality checks, especially in the DevOps space. and I would touch on, Kubernetes mainly, right? Um, so Kubernetes, is no longer new, right? We've been talking about Kubernetes for a long time, and yet I hear still, and I see a lot of, debates. I see a lot of organizations that they want to adopt, they struggle with it. From your point of view, do you see that the biggest gap is between how the technology is marketed versus how to actually use it in production?
Um, it's a good question. I mean, I think the Kubernetes came out of Google. Um, and it was kind of, from Borg, which is their early implementation of containers. And clearly Google operates at a scale where you could imagine that having a fleet of millions of containers takes its own kind of management platform, and that's what became Kubernetes. And like I remember being in the room very early in the days. This was probably 2014. This was before Kubernetes was open sourced, before Docker responded with Swarm. And in the room, Solomon Hayek's there, the team from Google, and kind of talking about what happens when there's more than one container and how do we manage that, and what is the platform to do that. That's what ended up being Kubernetes, and then put Docker a little bit on the back foot with how do they manage multiple containers. That became Swarm, and you had Mesosphere, and like all of these things. The unifying factor is that there's like more than one of these things that you need to manage. Um, and it's easy to imagine that most companies have more than one essentially compute resource that they want to manage. But very few have millions, very few in the grand scheme of things. So I think what's really, really important to understand is, are we a scale company, or do we want to dramatically increase our revenue? And many companies, and I'll take an example of, say, a retailer, like a traditional bricks and mortar retailer that needs to reinvent themselves for the 21st century, the digital economy, like whatever buzzword you want to use. And like they need to be able to, kind of grocery delivery and make sure their entire catalog and all of their sales are like, people can go and see what it is. They can maybe do click and collect. They can do all of these digital experiences. They want to do that. And this is a national chain. Like, they're doing this in order to dramatically increase revenue, improve customer experience. That doesn't mean that they're going to be at Google scale anytime soon. And it might be more effective. I'm saying might because this is it really just depends. But if you're not a scale company, you might not need technology that was designed exclusively for scale companies. And you can still do, microservices. You can still do, DevOps and CI/CD and CI/CD, continuous delivery. That whole in the Boodle, you can do FeatureOps, which I'm going to talk about here in a second, hopefully. But like, you don't necessarily need Kubernetes. And this is not saying like I'm not, dumping on Kubernetes. I'm saying these are technology decisions. And just like it might be appropriate to not open source, it might be appropriate to not go on Kubernetes. You might still want to use containerization, and you might elect to use, I don't know, like, a service on Amazon that or Google or Microsoft that extracts away the Kubernetes layer. It's like, I have these processes, but I want to be able to run them for me. Well, Amazon has a service that does that, where you're not running Kubernetes. That might be sufficient. Or you might look at, a serverless, to be able to do more Lambda functions. And like that would enable you to solve these problems. So I think hiring smart engineers who understand that the best engineered solutions take into consideration requirements and goals and then come up with an optimal solution is a really smart way to look at it. And who wants to be part of, even from a career perspective, part of a 3 or 4 year digital transformation program that Kubernetes is the de facto platform that we're going to use. And you get 2 years into that and you realize that, okay, we don't actually need this. We can do something that's much simpler. We can get there a lot faster. So I've seen it work both ways, where it's been, thank God we moved to Kubernetes because it really has enabled us to scale. And I've seen it elsewhere where it's like, man, this may not have been the best decision for us.
Right. One of the things that every company, right, especially building software, want to do is to move faster, right? And
Yeah.
part of this is, they need to work on what we call it the feature management, right? So I had the chance to interact with people who manage these things, usually in the product team, right?
Mhm.
Um, and one of the things, is about like how do we flag, a feature, and uh, make sure that we do what we do. So what I want you to do, Michael, first to explain this to us, like the feature management as a strategic layer. And we know like this is started as a developer convenience, but at Unleash you position as an infrastructure, right? So it's not only just a simple tag or something like this. So when did feature management stop being a tool also and start becoming kind of a full-fledged control plane?
Yeah. Excellent question. Um, I I think we can ground the conversation in a couple of recent incidents
Sure.
that really crystallized it. I think it's certainly for our customers, but I think increasingly for people who yet haven't adopted what we call feature ops, which we see as like the evolution of DevOps. Where, just very quickly on that distinction, DevOps is really about getting code into production. In our view, it's CI/CD. It's certainly operating that the services that serve that code, for instance, containers or container dies, how do I restart it? Like those are DevOps principles. Um, it doesn't really have as much to say about what that code is doing in production. That's where FeatureOps takes over. And the reason this is important, this distinction between this pipeline that gets code into production and manages that code as an object when it's in production, being distinct from what is that code actually enabling from the end user perspective, right? What capability or what feature is that code either providing or not providing? Thinking about these in two distinct layers is really, really important, because there are limits to how effective DevOps can be in maintaining, I would say, systems that are available and reliable at all times. So couple of examples of that. Back in June, Google GCP had a major outage related to BigQuery, brought down Gmail, brought down lots of services that were running on GCP. Kind of one of those, half the internet goes offline for a few hours types of incidents.
Yeah.
And in their postmortem, first of all, so that happened. Well, this is Google, right? They invented SRE, right? So they certainly have people that know how to respond to these types of incidents. They've automated everything. Of course, they have CI/CD in place. Of course, they can click a button and do a global rollout, right? It's not like, they have these SREs that are SSHing into individual servers and like, okay, restart this one, now restart. Like everything is automated, pretty much as automated as you could possibly get. And yet this outage took 4+ hours to recover from, right? This is an organization that basically is as far along on that DevOps journey as you could possibly get. And yet our recovery for that type of incident for them still takes 4 hours. And in their postmortem, one of the things that they called out explicitly, they said, if this feature, which by the way was a back end capability, it was kind of what they what they call critical binary, a back end feature, if this feature had been flag protected, it would have been caught in staging. Why? Well, because they could have done a gradual rollout. They could have realized that, ooh, when this flag is on, we see a spike in errors. Let's take a look at that. Let's fix it. But instead, they did what's called a big bang release, released it everywhere. And then the complicated, dependency laden kind of, reality that is a modern application meant that even when you fixed it using your DevOps processes, it still took many, many hours for those changes to propagate through the system. Fast forward to just a couple of weeks ago, and Cloudflare had another one of these kind of internet breaking outages. And this one was just like, I think a week or 10 days before Black Friday. Like, oh my God.
Right.
Like, what would have happened if this exact same like uneventful change, it was I think a database permission in this particular instance had happened like on Black Friday or on Thanksgiving Day. It would have been catastrophic for the businesses that rely on Cloudflare to protect their websites and their applications. And in Cloudflare's postmortem, they said essentially the same thing as Google, different words, but they said, we're going to enable more global kill switches. A kill switch is a feature flag by a different name. And a feature flag, for those who are not familiar, feature flags are really the technical foundation of FeatureOps, which extends this technology with cultural and engineering practices to optimize for it, is basically an on-off switch that happens at runtime. So configuration, you can apply changes kind of broadly to applications, but it requires an application restart, right? I have some configuration, I make an update to it, I'm going to push that out. My application needs to restart in order to read that new configuration. Feature flag is a runtime mechanism. I press on, now my application serves that feature. I press off, now my application goes to a different branch of that code that doesn't include that feature. And so you can recover from incidents a lot faster because you already have this mechanism that turns off and turns on capabilities instantly. And it's a little bit of a misnomer or unfortunate naming to call these feature flags, because the feature, the connotation is my website, my application, things that users interact with. Increasingly, like the real guts of an application are the things that users never see. It is these various binaries, these various services, even an API server, like these types of things also need this runtime control. And when you don't have it in Cloudflare's instance, in Google's instance, you can end up with these multi-hour downtime events that, like, to be frank, I'm not exaggerating, cost hundreds of millions of dollars, both on the organization that's responsible for it, as well as their customers. And just like, I'm going to take version control as an example. It's like everybody, like if you're doing software development right now and you're applying for a job and that company doesn't use version control, like you're going to go and look for another job. Like being part of an organization that doesn't do these fundamental engineering practices means that you are guaranteed to be woken up in the middle of the night to fix someone else's problem. And it's going to be very, very painful in the process. Feature flags and FeatureOps more broadly are becoming that level of capability where, so first of all, like ThoughtWorks and Martin Fowler, big advocates of FeatureOps. You've got Google's SRE handbook, talks about FeatureOps. Amazon's well-architected framework talks about FeatureOps. The Dora report mentions FeatureOps as kind of a ubiquitous practice of high-performing teams. And the reason is simply there's just different tools for the jobs. DevOps is great for getting code into production. Once that code is in production, controlling it in real time, meaning rolling back, rolling out, requires a different mechanism. And that's what feature flags will really excel at and what FeatureOps enables for teams.
Great explanation. Thank you, Michael. Even for myself, it was very educative. Now, how this affect decision-making from engineering perspective? And can it help also, in the governance on who takes responsibility? Because you talked about the kill switches also, right? So if I want to think about it also from a governance layer without slowing teams, can I put it in this context also as well? Like basically without having trade-offs, still have the safety when pushing new updates.
Yeah, the absolutely. And this is like this is what I call the magical 1+1 = 3 of FeatureOps, which is one of these rare technologies where you're mitigating risk for reasons we just described, right? It's really advantageous in the middle of an outage to be able to just like turn off that outage. But usually when we think about risk mitigation, we're going to introduce some friction for the benefit of mitigating risk. And often that is a sound business decision, right? This is, an approval and it is an example of that, right? I'm going to get an approval so that I can move forward in some process. And that approval is going to take time, but I'm going to make sure that I'm making the right decision. And people introduce approvals all the time. However, you think twice about, hey, if our goal as an organization is to increase our efficiency, which means moving faster for the same amount of investment, do we really want to be introducing friction? FeatureOps, it actually helps you move faster while you're also mitigating risk. And it's like, well, how is that possible? Well, I'll use Dora as a way to explain this. One of the things that the Dora metrics Dora report from Google points out is that teams that ship in smaller batch sizes ship faster, bring new features and new capabilities to market faster. And what do you need to do to ship in smaller batch sizes? You need to ship more frequently. The more frequently you can ship, the less production issues you end up having. That's like, that's really, really interesting, because you would normally think that if I'm doing things more frequently, I'm going to see more errors. Actually, when you do things more frequently in smaller batch sizes, you end up with less errors. This is very, very well researched. This is not Michael saying this. Is go to any number of Dora reports as they just launched the 2025 one, 2024, 20, like it is. This is the core kind of feature of it's like, it's a core feature of how the best engineering team in the world work. In order to ship that frequently, oftentimes you have capabilities that are not ready for prime time. Why are you shipping? Well, we want to ship so we can get feedback. That could be from an internal dev test environment. It could be from a cohort of beta users. It could be from internal employees. Like when you ship something, you can see whether it's fit for purpose or not. And when you do that frequently behind a feature flag, you can control who sees that capability. And this is the mechanism that enables engineering teams to, one, ship faster, two, experiment more to see what's working and what's not, and at the same time mitigate risk. Because let's say I'm experimenting with this new capability, and again, when I say capability, I mean a back-end change, a front-end change. It really doesn't matter, and we encourage teams to use feature flags for both of these things. In fact, I would say if you have to choose, do more on the back-end side than the front-end side, simply because those are typically the things that, a CSS bug is less likely to bring down your entire system than something that's happening at kind of a, at a key control layer on the back end. But if something does go wrong, click of a button or an agent can monitor what we describe as impact metrics, like the error rate, for instance, of associated with the application that's running on that particular feature. You can say, there's a strong correlation between this feature being turned on, this error rate going up. Let's roll that back. All of these things happen at the same time. And it's why teams that adopt this way of working actually have less outages and ship faster, which normally we think about these as in opposition to one another. We can either do one or the other, but in this case, we can do both.
Right. Now, I can't skip any episode nowadays without asking about the AI. And I want to ask you about AI in taking these decisions. So in the DevOps, and correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, like I'm not the guru of this, but I can imagine that people today are using AI to write configurations, to, of course, with automation, to get certain tasks done, right? And probably similar to coding, I think we are reaching somewhere, right? Now, when it comes to feature ops, right? Do you see AI becoming also a decision engine behind deciding, when to expose, roll back, or, all the things that you just mentioned before, taking these hard decisions? What's the role of AI in all this, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's already starting to happen. And couple of things that I'll point out. One is we're hearing about organizations that are saying, hey, like about 30% of our engineering work is keeping the lights on. There's a patch that needs to be applied, or we need to rotate all of our credentials, or just various work that isn't really strategic, however, is needed in order for the platform to continue to operate operate securely, et cetera. Um, we're hearing that AI is going to be used from an agentic perspective first in, well, I shouldn't say first, because code reviews, documentation, refactoring, kind of first pass at you know um, you know filling out a PR, or writing code that responds to a PRD, like those types of things, like it's already happening. When we're talking about like the how do we make a significant impact in our overall engineering effort, we're hearing that this keep the lights on work is going to leverage AI. So that's the first thing. Um, we're also hearing that a lot of teams are nervous about this type of work. And so a lot of the tooling that would make this in practice, effective, let's say, signals coming from a variety of systems. Those signals are increasingly made available to the LLM via, an MCP protocol. A lot of organizations are also not allowing MCP to be installed by individual developers. So, for instance, we've heard multiple instances where kind of all teams are using Microsoft Copilot in order to do AI assisted development. However, they're not able to install an MCP server. And for instance, Unleash has an MCP that can do things like when I'm going to create a PR, it can analyze the code repository and tell me, is this change trivial? In which case, like, it's just not even worth putting it in a feature flag, or is it on a critical path where I do want to um, use a feature flag? I mean, if I do, it can add that feature flag automatically to that change as part of the PR. It can create the flag within Unleash. It can create, based on your kind of your process, it can create a release plan that defines certain stage gates that that a feature would need to go through in order to progress. I mean, ultimately, it can use what we describe as impact metrics, which is these signals that are coming back from the application to say, okay, we've gone from 10% to 20% to 50% to 80%. And like, there's no digital screaming that's happening, right? The error rates have not gone up above a certain, so I'm comfortable. Or, ooh, when I went from 20 to 40%, I did see an increase in my P95 error rate. So I'm going to roll it back. Ultimately, teams will be able to do this. When it happens, I think it's going to vary dramatically between companies in different industries. The type that, even within, let's say, a company that's in financial services, they might have some services that are considered low risk, in which they'll be first to adopt this. Higher risk services will be last to adopt this. But the public service announcement that I need to make right now is that you don't have to use Unleash in order to use feature flags to mitigate the risk of all of this stuff happening. But please, as someone who has a bank that they rely on, as someone who like seeks medical care, like please, please, please the services that your listeners provide are the things that not only make our lives enjoyable at the moment, but that we rely on, that our children rely on. And I think there's a certain level of responsibility that comes with that to make sane decisions. And there are many, many ways that don't include using Unleash in order to make feature management and feature ops a core part of your engineering process. And when we add AI into it, when we add a non-deterministic system into our core engineering processes, where then the potential errors themselves are also non-deterministic, I think it requires a certain level of, I guess, humility to say, and this is the thing with the Google outage and the Cloudflare outage. No one at Google, no one at Cloudflare, when they were driving to work that morning or when they were walking down into their home office with a cup of coffee, said, today is the day that I'm not going to be able to buy something online because my company brought down half the internet. Like, that's, by definition, these are unplanned outages. They were not expected.
Right.
Unexpected will continue to happen. And FeatureOps is simply one more tool in the tool chest that we can do to avoid this. So AI is definitely happening. I think FeatureOps can mitigate a lot of the risk and help us get there faster, which is the promise that all organizations want to be more efficient. But it's up to engineering teams to say, hey, I'm going to prioritize this work. And again, it's one of those things that you actually move faster and have less risk. Like, what could be better? But I also realize it's a change, and sometimes the change portion of it is hard, even if the outcome is kind of objectively better.
Yeah, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Michael. So we're gonna, as we are calling it now today, we're gonna have like the human in the loop all the time. It's not like full autonomous AI that can take, the whole decision, because as you said, it's undetermined. We can't, we can't know, right? Sometimes, and this is the nature of life. I would call it. It's not only in software, probably, that things happen.
Yeah.
Outages can happen, and then you need to take these decisions. Maybe AI can probably narrow to us, maybe root cause analysis. It's good at getting us the, it's like when I make the similarity, and this again because I'm reading a book about it now. So it's like, when radiologists, they rely on AI to predict, like, if someone is diagnosed with certain disease, but actually it's still the human that will gonna give that final thing. So keeping the human in the loop, I think it's important also. So if you want to look forward, Michael, about like maybe future um, architectural decisions that teams should be aware about today to be ready for this AI driven delivery era, I would call it. So what that would look like.
Um, Well, we're having a lot of conversations now with very senior engineering leaders at some of the largest organizations in the world. These are people that are responsible for teams of 10,000 plus developers. And what they're hearing from their board is go, go, go with regard to AI investments. They also know that, like, they can't just, that doesn't mean assume any risk, right? Just, move fast and break things. Like, these are businesses with literally billions of dollars in revenue, customers that rely on their services. So they need to move quickly, but they also need to move safely. But also, it feels early to mandate a way of doing it. And one of the challenges that we hear from them is, I know that I need to encourage 1,000 flowers to bloom within my organization. I don't know where the killer use case from us is going to come. I have some ideas. My team is working on it, but ultimately, I think we're all going to be surprised by where that next, let's call it internal killer app comes from. And which tool is going to enable it, which process, which people, which team is going to enable it. And so I want to be fairly permissive with the ability to experiment, because that's how I'm going to drive innovation. However, like, I'm the one who's responsible for the systemic risk and the existential risk that can come with these technologies. And this is where one of the architectural kind of control points that we're advocating for is, again, this is like an architecture level discussion. Yes, Unleash has a platform that would enable this, but there are other platforms that would enable it, including things that you write yourself. It's not about a particular tool, it's about a process, which is to say, okay, for any non-trivial change, one of the things that we can do, it doesn't matter if it's Claude or if it's Copilot or if it's just you name it, we're going to make sure that any non-trivial change is wrapped in a feature flag, and that's going to be using the system that we built ourselves. So we're going to use a commercial off the shelf. We're going to use open source. We're going to use an enterprise. That we could care less about that part of it. However, each change is going to be wrapped in this feature flag, which again enables speed of innovation, enables additional experimentation faster, enables the agentic workflows where we can roll back all automatically. However, importantly, it enables that kill switch with it. And as a CIO or a CTO of a massive organization, this is one control point that I can, by fiat, implement the same way. It's like, okay, people, I know it's annoying, but we're doing two-factor authentication. You don't have a choice about it. This is not an individual preference issue like what IDE I like to work with. This is something that could have existential risk at our company. So I am making a decision by fiat that we're going to do it this way. But within that, now you can do whatever. Now, the thing that this enables for you is you can install anything on your device, because we have this central mechanism to understand if it's actually you who's doing it versus someone else. So it brings benefits to an individual developer, even if that individual developer might not like that individual decision. We see feature management as one of those key control layers for the CIO or the CTO, where the individual teams then have a ton of autonomy in terms of the individual tools, how they implement it, what they consider material change versus not. There's a lot of flexibility in there, but it gets you to a point where what we saw with Cloudflare, what we saw with Google, like these, hundreds of millions of dollar outages no longer happen. And we think that's incredibly important.
Absolutely. I think this is the main takeaway for today, Michael. And, please, as you said, like I'm begging also people, go implement the skill switch, right? Like it's needed than any time before, I would say. Final transition question, Michael, where people can find more information and probably maybe get in touch with you.
Yeah. So on social media, I personally am Ferranti M, FERRANTIM. And then for my company, getunleash.io. We're also available on we're open source. So on GitHub, you can go to unleash/unleash on GitHub, or getunleash/unleash on GitHub. And you can find our open source project, or just Google or ask ChatGPT, whatever floats your boat. We're not hard to find. Would love to hear from people. Would love it. In fact, if you think anything that I said was like, well, like I have a different, like, just hit me up as well, because that's what makes my job interesting. It's, it's when our ideals confront reality of, an engineer that has certain requirements that are outside of kind of what we've conceived, that is how we improve as well, both as individuals as well as a company. So please do reach out.
Sure. And I will make people's lives much easy. They don't have to do anything. They just need to go to the show notes. You will find all the links that Michael
Okay.
just mentioned. Michael, I really appreciate the time. It's very interesting, not only interesting for the sake of being interesting, it's like important topic that we discussed today. And, the two examples that you gave about, Google and Cloudflare's outages, I think this will resonate with anyone, from CTOs to engineers, all the way, in that full stack, I would call it, to think, about like how we can make sure that we keep the lights on, as you said.
Yeah.
So I hope also from my side that whoever listens or watches this, like they will benefit out of it. And thank you very much for your time, Michael.
Yeah. No
Um, yeah, and this is how I end my episodes. This is for the audience. This is my call to action. Simple one. If you just discovered us, give me a favor, subscribe, share it with your friends, colleagues. And if you are one of the people who keeps coming and are loyal fans to the podcast, I really appreciate all the help. Probably we are airing this because I have a very busy schedule. So basically, this is the first episode of 2026. So happy New Year. And thanks for all the help you did in the past 3 years, actually. So the podcast, finished its third year. We're entering the fourth year now. And 2025 was exceptional because we were able to enter the top 200 Apple podcast charts across multiple countries. This is, a honor that couldn't happen without all the supports of people who come back and listen to the podcast. And as I say always, stay tuned for a new episode very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hit that subscribe button, share the show with your tech-savvy friends and fellow entrepreneurs, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. Your support means the world to us.